The flight from the airport to the site was roughly 45 minutes long, at which time the sky gradually lightened to a light purple. Because the actual site was deep within the forest, the pilot was forced to land in a clearing some ways away, where the infantry company's larger vehicles had also been parked. The cold was even worse here than it was at the airport, and I was proud that our young lads could still thrive in weather that froze the Wehrmacht at Stalingrad and the gates of Moscow. A squad was there to meet us and to escort us to the rest of the unit, where Major Rogov was supervising the excavation of the thing they had stumbled upon earlier. Going was rough in some places as we entered the tree line, the snow going up to my knees. But a path had been tramped out in the snow by soldiers earlier, and after a while, we reached the area where the trees and ground had been scorched by something which, indeed, looked to have crashed into the frozen forest, at great speeds and from some height. The path of destruction seemed to go for at least 2 kilometers. I quickly began snapping photographs of the damage as the soldiers led us down the path of charred and fallen trees for about another 500 meters, which finally ended under a section of the forest which was heavy with trees. As we drew closer, all concerns that I had about the cold vanished, and were replaced with a different chill, which froze my spirit. There, we found Major Rogov and Captain Sidorev, along with at least 24 soldiers clearing snow away from a large, gray-colored metallic object buried in the snow. "Professor," said Major Rogov briskly. His eyes were red and bloodshot. "This way, quickly. Mr. Zemyenin, Miss Ivanov, you too. Watch your steps over these fallen logs." The soldiers had worked hard to move snow and trees away to form a relatively clear 20-meter perimeter around the object. There were only a few soldiers near the object now, the rest standing around the perimeter they had cleared and looking nervously at us. Rogov turned to me. "Mr. Zemyenin, I'm sure that Colonel Andreev has instructed you as to the parameters and limitations of the pictures you are about to take. You know what pictures you are allowed to take, and what you are not allowed to take, correct?" "Yes, Comrade Major," I answered, turning to one of the soldiers standing within the perimeter. "Lieutenant Orlov," I said, shaking the young officer's hand. "Good morning. Is it safe to be here?" "Radiation levels here are elevated, Mr. Zemyenin," he answered frankly. "We can operate here for a few hours at a time, which is why we are rotating soldiers in and out every couple of hours. We will have more specialized uniforms brought in later on, once it gets lighter." "Over here, Professor," motioned Rogov. "What can you tell us of this thing?" I followed the professor and Alina, snapping pictures of the object as I walked. This object was still more than halfway buried in the snow. It was 5 meters high and 3 meters wide and seemed to be made of a very thick metal. It was shaped like a bell, although one that was caved in and was lying on its side. Several deep gouges were torn into its side, though it did not appear that the crash was the cause of the damage. The object had crashed in such a way that the barely visible Nazi swastika on the side of the object was almost face up. "Dyatlov," Alina muttered, eyes wide and both hands over her mouth. "The what?" said Major Rogov. "Dyatlov," replied the professor. "It means the bell. It was supposedly one of Nazi Germany's last wonder weapons. One that supposedly was far more powerful than the V-series rockets and perhaps even more threatening than the nuclear bomb program." The soldiers around the perimeter stepped back away from the Nazi contraption, which had fallen from the sky over a year ago. "Turn about, lads," yelled Major Rogov. "Keep an eye out. Something in the hills was screaming last night, and you would not want it to take you while your backs were turned." While Major Rogov was admonishing his men, I stepped closer to the thing, which Alina called Dyatlov, snapping pictures of every inch of it. The object was indeed caved in and covered in what looked like deep scratches and gouges. What appeared to be a door or hatch mounted next to the burned, faded swastika was blown out, allowing me to peer into the darkness inside. All the while I was snapping photographs. "Professor," said Major Rogov impatiently, "what exactly is this thing? What is the bell?" I'm afraid that I'm not the subject matter expert on this thing, Major. That honor goes to my assistant, Miss Ivanov. Miss Ivanov? Asked Major Rogov. Well, come here, girl. Tell me what you know of this thing. I was still taking pictures when I heard Alina step forwards, then yelp as she tripped and fell in the snow. I got up and turned, seeing that a tree branch had snagged her boot and caused her to fall. Alina turned over, screaming as she crawled away from the tree branch. Professor Golubev was at her side, picking her up and pulling her away as Rogov stooped over the tree branch sticking out of the snow. Reaching down, Rogov pulled it from the snow. And it wasn't a tree branch. It was a gloved hand. It was attached to a dissected arm which had been ripped from the body. The torn and blood-stained sleeve in which the arm was in was that of a Nazi Waffen-SS officer. This is impossible, yelled Rogov. Whoever this is, he died not long ago, perhaps within the last year. Commander Rogov, said Captain Sidorev, shall I order my men to clear way for more of the area? Perhaps we can find more. No, Captain Sidorev, answered Rogov. In fact, except for Lieutenant Orlov and yourself, pull your men back another 50 meters. I will continue the search here with the professor and his assistant. We stood around Major Rogov, staring with disbelief at the amputated arm which he still carried. There was no doubt that the black leather uniform sleeve was indeed that of a Waffen-SS soldier, as it bore the patch of a black eagle over the Nazi swastika, the SS in a black circle. Commander Rogov, said Captain Sidorev after the last of his men had left the clearing. The last of the Nazis were driven from our lands over 15 years ago, yet here is one of the fascists. How is that possible? Could there be more? He turned, looking nervously at the collapsed bell-shaped objects. Perhaps he died in the crash? Major, I said, may I take photographs of the evidence? Of course, Mr. Zemyenin, said Rogov, putting the arm back down on the ground. Meanwhile, everyone else, I want you to begin feeling around under the snow. Let us see if we can find any more pieces of our friend here. I took several pictures of the arm while the others, including Lieutenant Orlov and his men, began picking around in the snow. To my surprise, Alina was enthusiastically jabbing down at the snow with a tree branch, probing around to find more pieces of the dead Nazi's body. 10 meters from where she tripped over the arm, she found something else. Scooping snow away from around an unusual black mound, she announced, I found the torso, and it has an arm. Lieutenant Orlov's men completed the process of scooping away the snow, revealing the headless, legless torso of the Nazi officer. The left arm was still attached, frozen entrails hanging out of the gaping wound below the abdomen. It looked like he had been ripped in half. Major Rogov stood over the remains, lighting a cigarette. Mr. Zemyenin, he asked, did you see any signs of flesh or human tissue within the wreckage? No, Comrade Major, I said. None that I could see. I do not think this man died in the crash. It appears he died after he walked away. Major Rogov searched within the torn black leather coat for any identity of the dead Nazi, but found nothing. Mr. Zemyenin, please document this, and the rest of you, continue searching for any signs that there may have been others. As I stepped forward and began taking pictures, I noticed that the arm was extended, the gloved hand frozen in the shape of a C, as if it was holding something. I began digging around the area where the arm had been, wiping away snow until my hand brushed against something hard and roughly square-shaped. It was a brown leather pouch. Lifting it out of the snow, I undid the straps and gingerly pulled out the contents. It was a book. Comrade Rogov, I yelled. I have found something. The others quit searching and came to me, eyes focused on the strange artifact I had discovered. What have you found, Mikhail? Said Rogov, standing next to me and looking over my shoulder. I carefully opened the book, surprised at how well preserved it was despite being buried for a year. It appears to be a handwritten journal. It's written by an Oberst Hans Kimlische, a Nazi colonel, I said, shaking my head. The name does not ring a bell. Professor, said Major Rogov, what can you tell us about this Orbest Kemliche? As I said earlier, Comrade Major, if a tiger or a panther tank fell out of the sky, or if the journal was written by Rommel or Himmler, I could be of better service. But I'm afraid that Miss Ivanov would be the best on the subject matter here. Alina, said Major Rogov. All eyes turned to the young university intern. Colonel Hans Kemliche? She said, rubbing her chin in thought. I wonder if it could be Colonel Hans Kammler. There's some speculation as to his actual name, but the man known as Hans Kammler or Hans Kemliche was a Waffen-SS officer who was said to be in charge of the research and development of some of Germany's secret Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons. May I please see the manuscript, Mr. Zemyanin? I looked at Major Rogov and he nodded. Taking the Nazi artifact from me, Alina carefully leafed through the pages. I do not believe that these pages are brittle with age, but from intense heat. This is interesting. Colonel Kemliche opens his journal with a long dissertation on something he describes as Schindler als Zeitreisen, or traveling faster than time. Carefully turning the pages, lest they crumble and fall apart, she came to a section in the middle of Kemliche's journal. Here he is describing Die Glocke on being not a vehicle for conventional travel, but rather Der Schlüssel zur Zeit, the key to time. She turned to look at the bell-shaped wreckage buried in the snow, regarding it with a growing sense of awe. Remarkable, said the professor. We had long heard that the Nazis had been experimenting in such things as time travel from the German soldiers we had captured, but we dismissed them as the boastful ravings of soldiers who knew that their war was lost. The professor noticed the look of grave concern on Alina's face as she turned to the end of the journal. What is it, Alina? It's nothing, Professor, she answered. It's just that the last entry in the journal reads, Die Leer ist nicht leer. Alina shuddered. What does that mean, Alina? Said Rogov impatiently. Spit it out, girl. Die Leer ist nicht leer, I said, annoyed at Major Rogov for being so gruff with the young intern. Means the void is not empty. I see, said Rogov, staring back at me with barely hidden contempt as he held out his hand towards Alina. I'll be taking that journal now, Miss Ivanov. We don't want any more damage to it before we can. A piercing screech echoed across the frozen valley, causing the soldiers to bring up their weapons and look nervously around them, as the unearthly sound continued to reverberate, so powerful that it actually shook snow off of the skeletal limbs of trees. There, said Captain Sidorev, binoculars to his eyes and pointing to an elevated spot in the snow-covered forest to our northwest, and almost 1.5 kilometers distant were trees being toppled over by some violent, unseen force moving slowly away from us. Lieutenant, ordered Sidorev, get your men aboard the BTRs and investigate what that is. Then, turning to Lieutenant Orlov, Sidorev said, Orlov, your lads accompany the infantry. See if that thing is the source of your unusual radiation spikes. Another horrifying screech pierced the air, sending icicles through my veins and making me grateful that my days as a soldier were far behind me. It took some time to race back through the forest to get back to the vehicles. To their credit, our young soldiers did not hesitate to follow orders as they immediately mounted on their BTR-50 tracked armored transports and dashed across the open tundra, throwing up plumes of snow and frozen ground behind them. The rest of us, along with the remainder of Sidorev's infantry company, mounted back onto the wheeled BTRs and gas-light utility trucks and followed the tracked vehicles. Because the tracked vehicles had far better traction on the snow and ice, they quickly pulled ahead of us, as our wheeled vehicles attempted to follow behind in the tracks, which they had just made. The unseen thing which was making the unholy screeching as it toppled trees down was about 1 kilometer ahead of the lead-tracked BTRs. They followed it up to the tree line, where the wide armored vehicles could follow no longer. Radioing back that the tracks could go no further, Major Rogov instructed the forward platoons, almost 80 men total, to dismount and continue the pursuit on foot. The remainder of the infantry company would follow up once we reached their location. We were still half a kilometer from the tracks, our wheeled vehicles having difficulty keeping up in the thick snow. Sidorev's men were in constant contact with us over the radio, informing us that whatever they were pursuing was also being slowed down by the dense forest. Minutes later, we finally arrived at the location where the tracked BTRs were parked when the radio erupted with soldiers screaming. Automatic weapons fire echoed from the forest. Both Captain Sidorev and Major Rogov were yelling into their radios, demanding a situation report from the two platoons who were in contact with the thing. Horrific screeches from an otherworldly throat were mixed with frantic automatic weapons fire somewhere unseen in the forest ahead of us. A radio man from the first platoon was screaming incoherently, crying that his platoon leader had been torn apart by a demon. "Lieutenant Orlov!" yelled Major Rogov into the radio. "Put him on the radio!"
"He's dead, sir!"
screamed the radio man.
"His team was ahead of us. They died when the thing...
A sickening crunch came over the radio, like a spear going through bone and flesh, followed by a gurgling sound coming from the radio man.
"It's coming your way."
After that, the radio fell dead to static. The thing that emerged from the trees froze my blood in terror, making me a statue, my brain screaming vainly at my legs to move. It was like a crab, only its bony exoskeleton was black, and the 6 armored and spine-covered legs upon which it used to scuttle across the frozen ground were at least 20 meters long, ending in a point, much like that of a crab. The flat, oblong-shaped body was at least 45 to 50 meters in width and tapered at either side to 2 very long points, resembling spears, while all along the horror's armored flanks were a multitude of smaller, spike-shaped protrusions. Twin, black pincer arms extended 20 meters from the front of the body, each ending in 4 3-meter-long grasping claws. From its rear end, a thick, segmented tail rose 15 meters into the air, much like a scorpion's tail. However, where the stinger should have been, a black skeletal head shaped like some misshapen prehistoric alligator rested. And it was from within its horrific maw, lined with row upon row of pointed black teeth, came the blood-chilling screech which echoed for kilometers, emanating a foul odor which followed the monstrosity from the blackest pits of hell. That thing from the void, that thing which dwelled in the unspeakable in-between of time and space and which had somehow clung onto the Nazi time machine and was then dragged to Earth, to our motherland, scuttled with surprising speed towards us. It was a sound like armor clanking as it raced toward us, for indeed, its outer shell proved to be as hard as tank armor, as the rifle and machine gun rounds fired at it by our brave lads had no effect. With a terrifying screech as if it were howling in victory, the demon pounced upon the hasty skirmish line established by our soldiers, mercilessly tearing into them and their BTR transports. One brave heavy machine gunner aboard a wheeled BTR transport opened fire at the beast, attracting its attention and buying his comrades a few futile seconds to retreat. The BTR was snatched up by one of the demon's clawed appendages and nearly snapped in half, crushing the courageous heavy machine gunner that was trapped within. Captain Sidorev was on board another BTR, directing his gunner to continue firing his heavy machine gun while yelling at what was left of his unit to quickly climb aboard the remaining transports. In an unsettling display of intelligence and understanding, the demon from the void launched the crushed BTR in its claws at Captain Sidorev's vehicle. It landed with a terrible crash of metal and gore, instantly crushing Sidorev and the soldiers within. As if to ensure that no one remained alive in the twisted wreckage, the monster slammed its own claws down upon the ruined vehicles, flattening them and any soldier unlucky enough to have survived. Yet despite the bloodshed and carnage that I saw taking place only 100 meters in front of me, our young lads screaming and gurgling as they were ruthlessly impaled and taken up into the air to be fed into this hungry, hungry jaws, I unconsciously had my camera up, snapping photo after photo. Only a handful of soldiers were still alive, a few still firing their weapons but most retreating to any vehicle available. My mind was just a fog of horrific images, my ears ringing from the sounds of the chaos and destruction, when I felt an urgent tug at my coat sleeve. Turning in shock, I saw Alina pulling at me. Her mouth was moving, but I could not hear what she was saying. Still tugging frantically at my sleeve, she was desperately pointing behind her towards Major Rogov. Major Rogov was only 10 meters away, waving his hands towards us to hurry up and get to his vehicle. Me, Alina, and the professor were only able to take 2 steps towards Rogov when we were overcome by a huge shadow. Major Rogov was literally split in half from a spike-tipped leg which punctured him from head to foot. A second spike-tipped leg crashed down on his Gaz-67 Jeep, impaling the driver as the gigantic spike crashed through the roof of the vehicle. The thing looked down at us with its black reptilian skull. Its hungry maw opened. It stared at us with black eyes seemingly hidden behind empty eye sockets. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling for the Makarov pistol with Sergeant Galkin issued to me, and realized that I had forgotten it back in the terminal. Not that it would have helped us. The air was now hot, reeking with the stench of burning sulfur, the demon and the sickening metallic odor of spilled blood. I held Alina and the professor close, awaiting the inevitable when the chatter of machine gun fire ripped into the side of the beast's head. It turned, raging in anger as it saw the last 2-wheeled BTRs escaping towards the north. The demon from the void turned and bounded after them. "Quickly!" I yelled. "They might not get far or last long." I hustled Alina and the professor across the bloody snow towards the last remaining vehicle that looked to still be operable. It tracked an armored BTR-50. Though it was only 50 meters away from us, it felt as if we had slogged through several kilometers over several hours just to reach it. My heart sank as I heard the machine guns fall silent behind me, followed by the tearing of metal and the horrified screams of doomed soldiers. Not wanting to turn around because I was too fearful of what I knew I would see, I literally tossed Alina and the professor into the tracked vehicle, motioning them to lie quiet and still in the hopes that the demon might somehow have forgotten us, and praying that the armored sides of the vehicle would shield us if the demon didn't. I looked up to see a soldier standing out of the hatch, stoically manning a machine gun. "Where's the driver?" I yelled up at him. The soldier was young, perhaps not even in his 20s, and tears flowed down his face. The driver's dead," the soldier said. "The driver's dead, and I don't know how to operate this thing." "Leave this to me." I jumped back in surprise as the professor hustled up the troop compartment towards the front of the vehicle, with all the energy and enthusiasm of a man half his age. "Professor," said Alina, her hands reaching out as if to stop him, "where are you going?" The engine of the BTR-50 roared to life as the rattle of machine gun fire echoed into the hull of the vehicle. "Wait!" I yelled. "What are you doing, soldier? You'll only attract its attention." "That demon killed my unit," yelled the soldier as he fired his machine gun. He was screaming in anger as he fired, hundreds of spent shell casings falling into the vehicle. From my vantage point inside the vehicle, I could only see the soldier's lower torso and legs. There was a hard thump on the roof, and the soldier's yells were abruptly cut short, as his body was literally lifted up and out of the gunner's hatch. I ran forwards to pull him back, but it was far too late. I caught a brief glimpse of the demon bringing the unfortunate soldier up into its mouth before I reached up and slammed the gunner's hatch shut. Immediately, I was tossed forwards as the professor put the BTR in gear and we launched backwards. The rear of the vehicle hit something hard and I heard something like a tree branch snapping, followed by the beast shrieking in pain and surprise. "It's been nearly 20 years since I last drove one of these things." Slamming the vehicle into gear again, I was tossed into Alina's lap as the professor launched the ungainly vehicle forwards. I looked up from between Alina's legs. She was blushing as she stared down at me, completely embarrassed. I said, "I'm sorry, Alina. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." I stood up quickly, legs wobbling as the BTR rolled over the snow at speeds that it was not safely designed to travel. Thankfully, the tracks on this heavier vehicle gave it much better maneuverability and speed on the ice and snow over its wheeled counterparts. I cautiously popped open the gunner's hatch and looked behind us. The demon was still in pursuit, but 2 of its front legs were bent in an odd angle as a result of the professor's fortuitous mistake in shifting gears, thus making it difficult for the demon to keep up with us. Still, though its injury had forced it to slow down, the horror was still persistent and angry as it scuttled after us, creating with its movements the clinking sound as if we were being pursued by knights on horseback. I pulled out my camera and began snapping pictures of the demon as it lumbered after us. Then, slamming the hatch shut again, I began rummaging through the BTR's commander station. What are you looking for, Mr. Zemyanin?" asked Alina as she hung on for dear life while the BTR rumbled and shook. "I'm looking for the radio equipment." "Aha!" I yelled, finally finding the hand mic and turning on the radio. "Professor, do you have any idea where we're headed?" "Of course, my boy," yelled the professor, sounding as if he was having the time of his life. "We're on a trail headed roughly northwest towards Dyatlov's Pass. However, the trail we are now on will become significantly narrower soon." "Okay," I said. "Got it." Then, yelling into the radio, I said, Colonel Andreev, this is Zemyanin. Any unit on this frequency, this is Mikhail Zemyanin. Colonel Andreev, are you there?" I had not learned any of the radio call signs, and frankly, we didn't have time for such formalities.
Last station, this is Oscar 1-3. Who is this? How did you get on a military frequency?"
"This is Mikhail Zemyanin. I'm a civilian journalist. Something has gone terribly wrong. Major Rogov, Captain Siderov, we found—"
"Mr. Zemyanin,"
yelled the voice on the other end.
"It is strictly forbidden for unauthorized civilians to utilize military radio frequencies. Put Captain Sidorev on the line. Break, came
another voice over the radio.
"This is Colonel Andreev."
I breathed a sigh of relief.
"Mikhail, is that you?"
"Yes, it's me. Look, we found something. It took Major Rogov and Captain—"
Break,
yelled Andreev angrily into the radio again.
"Mikhail, calm down. Listen carefully. Are you facing another incident like the one in the Kurgan Mountains?"
I slowed my breathing, remembering the time as a child when Stanislav rescued me from being eaten by a wolf. "Yes," I said as calmly as I could. "But this is far worse."
"Okay, Mikhail. Listen closely. Tune the radio to the following frequency. It is a secured channel."
Doing as I was told, I switched the frequency to the one in which Stanislav had given me. Behind us, I could hear the screeches of the demon outside of our armored hull getting louder. It seemed that not only did it not grow tired, it was also getting closer. "How are we looking, Professor?" I yelled. "This clunking thing isn't as responsive or maneuverable as my old T-34 tank," he replied. "How are we supposed to defend the motherland against NATO using equipment like this piece of shit, huh? Anyway, to answer your question, we will either run out of the road or fuel if something doesn't happen soon."
"Mikhail, this is Andreev."
His voice boomed over the secure channel.
"What is happening out there? Where are you?"
"We're approximately 80 kilometers northeast of your position. We're leaving Captain Sidorev's designated search area, traveling roughly due east up the path that leads to Dyatlov's Pass." As quickly as possible, I explained our desperate and impossible situation, of the thing which ambushed us, and the loss of Captain Sidorev's entire motorized infantry company. To my surprise, Stanislav did not sound the least bit doubtful of my story.
"Okay. Is the target still pursuing you?"
"Yes," I said. This was followed by a loud, high-pitched roar coming from behind us, which echoed inside the crew compartment.
"Oh my god, Mikhail. Was that it?"
"Yes, Stanislav. It is right behind us even as I speak. No more than 100 meters, I'd estimate. The professor says that we will either run out of road or fuel soon."
"The professor is driving the BTR? How do you get yourself into such misadventures, Mikhail?"
Andreev's voice returned to being cold and collected.
"Look, Mikhail. I have 2 MiG-21 fighters en route to your location. They're about 5 minutes away and are armed with air-to-ground weaponry. I'm also on the way with my security platoon armed with RPGs. We're coming in by helicopter from the southeast. Just stay ahead of the beast until we get there."